Welcome to episode 3 of the See It Our Way podcast, brought to you by VICTA. Apologies that this episode is a little bit later than usual. Now, because of the heat wave we had here in the UK, we did the most British thing and just went into complete meltdown because of how hot it was. But there we go. Now, this episode is all about ableism. Now, ableism may be a term that you are not familiar with. Well, lucky for you, this episode will teach you all about it. Also, this episode we are back with Ruqaiya as we continue the journey of the process of getting a guide dog and more pet peeves with Ellie. But we start today's episode with Lydia and Grace.
Hi, I'm Lydia. I'm a member of the VICTA Changemakers programme. I was born blind with Labour's congenital amaurosis, LCA, because it's a long name. And I am a Braille and long cane user and have been since birth. And I'm joined by Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace. I was a member of the VICTA Changemakers programme last year. I also did the programme when it was I think it was the Young Ambassadors programme a few years ago, because since then I really sort of support the work of VICTA and will, especially in the creative sector, and will do anything that I can to support. Like Lydia, I was born blind, and I have septo-optic dysplasia, and I also have nystagmus, which, for those who might not be as familiar with the vision impairment world, basically means that my eyes constantly move and dance. And I am also a Braille and long cane user.
I forgot to say I have nystagmus as well.
Oh, no way!
I know. And they thought I had septo-optic dysplasia, but it turns out that my eye condition just makes it look like I have. So
you're
there
joking.
I know, they took one of my eye conditions away a few years ago.
Because I have genuinely never, or like very rarely, had any sort of contact with anyone who either has it or has even would know what it was. So
there you go. But it's so interesting, isn't it? I think because being blind is like a really low incidence disability, that information is actually really hard to find. Information on actually being blind, but then also on access. Like, because we are such a minority, it's really hard, isn't it? Anyway, ableism. So we thought it would be really interesting to come and talk about ableism, because it's a word that actually is really, really common for those of us, not just who are blind, but for those of us who are living with a disability, but actually is not talked about. You know, when you see lists of discrimination and things like that, you get racism, homophobia, sexism all the time. You see those lists, but it's quite rare, in my experience anyway. Grace, I don't know if you agree with this, but it's quite rare to find the ableism on there as well, which I always have found really funny, because actually I would say that as someone with a vision impairment, you know, when I leave the house, I've either got my cane or my guide dog. It's very obvious that I can't see. And ableism, in some form or another, is probably going to happen at some point. So I just thought it'd be really interesting to explore, you know, the definitions of ableism, you know, as defined by a few different dictionaries, and also people, and then kind of just have a chat about it, because, as I say, it's a topic that I don't think is talked about enough. So I guess before we get started, I'd just like to look at the definitions of ableism. I've got a few different ones here, because actually you can define it in very different ways. So one dictionary defines it as policies, behaviours, rules, etc., that result in unfair or harmful treatment of disabled people. So that's like quite a surface level definition. And I would say that a good example of that is when a sign is in print but not in Braille, for example. That is technically ableism because it's not accessible. Or probably a more pertinent example would be when someone's in a wheelchair and you can't get into a building because it's just steps and there's no access via ramp. But then you can also define ableism as the tendency to regard people with a disability as incomplete, diminished, or damaged, and to measure the quality of life with a disability against a non-disabled standard. And that is my favourite definition. So, Grace, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
I think with the first definition, I think both examples really kind of hit home. I think Braille is one where, if you know about Braille, when you see it, it's quite obvious. But
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because even when I often feel like the more damaging thing is that to add braille is seen as like a tick box exercise. So sometimes you'll be somewhere and someone will go, oh look, there's braille, and everyone will be really excited about it. And actually the braille is either in a stupid place, which a blind person would just never find. Like, it's not on anywhere where your hands would go, or it's like I've seen really, really big braille, because if you're going to make print big, why not make braille big? Or just braille that's incorrect, that's just blatantly wrong. And I think that is even possibly even more, feels even more like ableist than actually that, because they've just sort of slapped it on as an afterthought. And actually, if you had an incorrectly printed sign, and I don't mean like a simple spelling mistake, I mean like a blatantly incorrect sign, I think people would probably say something, but because it's braille, people don't tend to. So when I hear, oh look, there's braille, my first reaction isn't, oh that's nice. My first reaction is, oh no, here we go.
Exactly. And I think because braille, I think it comes back to that thing as well, because braille is, there's this kind of, I don't know if it's an assumption, but I think we are increasingly moving towards a time where both in and outside of the blind and VI world, vision impaired world, it's most likely that we're going to use speech. I think because of that, braille is a very, if you know kind of thing, which is really sad because I'm a huge advocate for braille. I think it's great. So I completely sort of get what you're saying there, in that when it is exciting, it's actually quite sad, because perhaps the reason that it's portrayed as being something exciting, and perhaps something that's, when it's done and it's not done with the level of care and attention that it clearly needs, I think that's really sad, because it's a show that it's not as well known as it should be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really like, again, it's incorrect, which is a shame. But I think that I wish people would think more like practically, because so in a train station in the city which I live in, there's braille on the handrails, which of stairs, which I really like, because that's where hands go. If there was braille on all the door handles of the men's and women's toilets, that would be helpful. Actually think about, where are people touching? Where would braille be useful? And imagine if there was braille everywhere all the time, on all the handrails, on all the door handles. Imagine how much awareness that would raise. Like, wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be bliss.
It would.
The second definition really resonated with me, and it actually made me think of how I've read a couple of books lately that aren't about disability, but they've got disabled characters in them. The books are set in the sort of between the 60s and 80s, and the characters with the disabilities play very minor roles in the books. They don't really have any influence on the story. They're just there to sort of add a little extra layer to the story. But they're portrayed as being very innocent. They're children, very pure, very loving, which is all great, and that's lovely. But it's also portrayed in a very negative way that other minor characters aren't portrayed in. It's very much, oh, they're broken. It's terrible that they're disabled. There's something wrong with them. They need fixing. And so that second definition made me think back to those books and think, if those characters weren't disabled, would they have been portrayed as sweet, weak, diminished in a negative way? And how attitudes have changed over time, that actually, looking at that perhaps got to me in a way that it wouldn't have done years ago.
That is the type of ableism I think that cuts much deeper, because and again, it's the assumptions that people make, that we are less than, we are broken.
We are innocent because we couldn't possibly be able to do anything and live our lives.
I think the other really interesting thing I find about ableism is that when you come across other forms of discrimination, like I mentioned before, like racism, sexism, generally you find when that's happening, it's done with some sort of deliberate malice or ignorance. It's done with a lot of, if you're going out and if you're doing one of those things, then you're probably trying to be unkind in the majority of cases. Whereas I think with ableism, often it's very much hidden behind kindness. And I find that, so a couple of examples. And this happened a few times when I do a lot of train travel, and when I'm getting off a train, and I've got my cane, I find the door handle, I feel with my cane where the step is, and I step down. And I find what people tend to do is they shout at me about the fact that there's a step there, and I'm like, well, I know there's a step there because I stepped up it to get on the train. And they will sort of, and then sometimes I've had it before where like I've had 3 or 4 women grab me as I'm trying to get down the step. And I've said to them like very clearly, no, I'm okay, I don't need your help, because actually grabbing someone on a step is not very safe. And they have ignored me and held on to me until I have got myself, or they've got me down the step. And in my head, that's ableist, because you've removed my dignity, the dignity that other people take for granted because they're allowed to step out of a train without being grabbed. You've taken that away from me, and you've made me feel less than because you haven't listened to me when I've told you I don't need your help. And that is ableist, because you have assumed that I need your help. You haven't asked, and then you've ignored me when I've told you. But onlookers probably would have thought, oh, they're kind, they're helping her. And I think it's really interesting, the same thing happened when I was in a choir, and part of my route when I was dropped off was to walk up some steps along a path, and then I had to climb over. I took a shortcut because it was around the main road the other way, and so I would climb over a little knee-high wall, walk along a path, and then get into the cathedral. And whenever I told people, like the other people in my choir, where I was going to get back, they would all go, oh no, you can't. Oh no, not the knee-high wall. Oh my gosh. And then when they either saw me do it because they insisted on walking with me, they told me how clever I was. And I'm like, that looks kind. That looks like you're giving me a compliment. But you wouldn't be telling a 19, 20-year-old who could see that they were clever for climbing over a knee-high wall. So I think it's really interesting because, as I say, ableism, I think it can be different than other forms of discrimination because often it's hidden behind the kindness. I don't know if you've had similar experiences, Grace, or have any like different views.
That is so resonant, Lydia. That really, really is. I mean, the one that I get told for doing the simplest tasks. So just sort of, I wouldn't go into detail, but the one that really sticks out to me was I went out one day and the weather was bad, and I was having quite a bad day anyway, and then struggling to get over piles of mud, being blind. And once I'd got with support, once I'd got over this piece of mud, I got told, you're an inspiration, you are. And I look at that now and I think, what praise and what recognition did you have for everyone else who walked over that same piece of mud? Are they an inspiration to you? And B, what about the person who supported me to get over that piece of mud? Are they an inspiration? Why is all the attention on me? Why am I special? Because I can't see.
Oh gosh, the inspiration word is so... I mean, I understand. The thing is, it used to make me really, really angry as soon as I heard it. And as I've got older, I understand where it comes from, because when people say it, they're probably thinking, oh, wow, I couldn't do that if I couldn't see. So yeah. I get it a lot when I'm pouring like a kettle, if I'm making someone a cup of tea, and they go, oh, you're inspirational. My grandparents will do it. I'm like, Grandma, you've seen me do it like for years now. Like, come on. But that's what they're thinking. They're comparing themselves. And actually, it's not. I think in today's culture, we look for things that are inspirational, that are over the top. And actually, what we're doing is we are just going about our normal daily lives, because actually you can't compare. As someone watching a blind person make a cup of tea or step over some mud, you can't compare yourself, because, if you lost your sight tomorrow, then you probably wouldn't be able to. But a year or two on, if you had the support and the adaptions and everything that we've had, of course you would. it's interesting, isn't it?
I mean, I am probably internally guilty of it because as a disabled person myself, which I think is another layer, I am inspired by disabled people who do the simple parts of disability, like just living their everyday lives and being themselves, because I know the amount of guts that takes. But would I go up to that person and say, oh, you're an absolute inspiration? No way.
No, I like to, because I think it's really important to recognize when people do things that are good. And so I know someone who he's very new to the VI thing, and he coaches a VI sport. And he's an older gentleman. He's quite new to the disability thing, but he also does wheelchair sports. And every single time I see him, he will tell me, "Oh, this person is amazing in a wheelchair, and it's amazing how they can do this, and it's amazing how they." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, tell me something different," because this isn't new to me. I've been blind forever. I'm just there to play the sport. I don't need to know about all the other people in wheelchairs or who are blind who are doing amazing things, because I am just a 20-year-old girl who wants to play the sport.
I think the other thing, sort of where you were just saying, Lydia, about, tell me something different about the person, because I'm just here because I'm here to do the activity. I think what that kind of makes me think of as well is sympathy, sort of ableist sympathy, and how when someone finds out you're blind or disabled, they act like your life is awful and life has done you this great injustice that they need to make up for. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, some days, right, being blind is really, really hard. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my guide dog snoring in the background. She's a lab. She's got so much excess skin around her face that when she snores, it all sort of ruffles. It's very loud.
I can't hear a thing.
Oh, good. But yeah, no, I find that as well. Like some days, yes, being blind is really hard. I'm sure you'll agree. There are some days where I just wish I would have been born with normal eyes, and of course I do. I'm sure every disabled person does that. And I think then with people that you love, with people that you trust, you have a meltdown. You say, I wish I could see. And then you sort yourself out and you get on. But when someone who doesn't know you does that, you're like, well, even if you have had a bad day, it's just never a helpful response, is it?
Exactly. That's so similar to another point that, when we were talking about the inspiration thing, I think that's another thing when comments, I think that it kind of comes back to it that when a comment or an opinion or a compliment or whatever it is comes from someone who knows you, it's fine. But when it comes from someone who doesn't know you or hasn't been in your story, quite frankly, it's not their business. So, I get, my family, my friends, my support worker, they're with me on my journey. They know how hard things can be. They're there on those hard days where I don't want to be disabled and I feel like I'm getting everything wrong. I haven't got this disabled adult thing figured out at all and I just need a cuddle. They're there on those days. So when things do go well, they have the right to stand up and say, you know what, I'm really proud of you. And that's a compliment and that's taken with warmth and love. But the random person in the street who thinks I'm such an inspiration because I got out of bed and read the braille on my medicine box, you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know who's been with me on my journey and helped me get to where I am. So just get on with your day and I'll get on with mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just briefly returning to, other people feeling the need to tell us about other inspirational, in quotation marks, disabled people.
Oh, God.
I think, or even just someone who sees me and sees that I'm blind and then goes, oh, I knew a blind person once. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. That's good. Just really odd. I find, and again, maybe this isn't ableism, but it's just people, sometimes you get really weird responses from people that you just would not get, I don't think.
Yep.
You weren't disabled. But what I tend to do is I've figured out now that what if there's an inspirational story being told, I will go, oh yeah, that's cool, because cool is not invalidating their experience. You know, maybe they've worked really hard to get to where they are. They probably have. But it's also not going, oh wow, you're such an inspiration.
Exactly. It glamorizes disability, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I was saying to my mum the other day after we'd watched The Theory of Everything, it's not glamorous. Disability is not glamorous at all. It's
messy.
Real.
It's messy. I always say when because being blind is messy, right? When you move around from A to B, it's messy because you've got to hit things to figure out that they're there. And sometimes, most of the time, when I'm ricocheting off walls and doors and things with my cane, I don't need your help. I just need space to figure it out. And actually, yes, I'll take longer. Yes, it'll look like I'm lost. But actually, I'm probably not. I'm probably just figuring it out.
Yeah.
So then I suppose to move on to a more positive angle, what do you think, and Amy, I'll bring you into this as well. What do you think are some positive things that we can do as disabled people, but also society can do to help eradicate this issue of ableism? Because we've kind of seen that it sort of seeps into everyday life that disabled people lead, and how do we think that we should be encouraging people to move forward and to make this situation better?
I guess it's like kind of just proving to the wider society that yes, we might have a disability, but that doesn't stop us from doing certain things. I guess it's just proving to the wider society that how able we actually are. Just because we have a disability, that doesn't mean we can't do certain things.
Amy, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Amy. Eye conditions I have anophthalmia in my left eye, which basically means when I was born, my eye socket was empty, so my eye didn't grow properly. And I have microphthalmia in my right eye, so I have a small right eye. And I also have coloboma.
Wow, 3 eye conditions. That's greedy, that is.
I know, isn't it?
Grace, did you have any thoughts on the question?
Yeah. I think, honestly, the best thing we can do is normalise seeing disabled people just being out in the world, coexisting alongside people who don't have disabilities and just being themselves, just getting on with life. Because I think what the world portrays to us as disabled people, as I say, it either negatively glamorizes it as the world has done you a massive injustice, you are broken. It's almost like you need compensation for something that's been done to you, which is absolutely not true.
Definitely.
Oh, I'm so sorry you're disabled. Right, thank you. Or the other way they portray it, as we've said, is you're such an inspiration. You could be great. You could, scale the world on your own and or win the Paralympics or make the history books. What we need to see more of is the disabled people who are just out in the world and being themselves, because that takes an immense amount of guts.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. And it's like saying that just because we have a disability, that doesn't mean that we can't have a normal life. We absolutely can.
Exactly.
And I read books about, that when someone who is blind has written their autobiography, like, David Blunkett, whatever. And yes, they're really interesting to read, because you can say, oh, I completely sympathise. I completely agree with that. I guess it depends how it's written. Some people are like, oh, I really struggle with doing these things. But then sometimes you read, like I read another book and that was the real vibe I got from it. But it's some books, they just say things as they are that you can really sympathise with. So yeah, I guess it's really interesting.
I think it's really interesting what you said about, like, I found this, either as a disabled person, you're either at the top or the bottom of the pile. You're either unable to access anything and you feel less than, or you are put on this pedestal and expected to be an inspiration. And so for me, I know that now, so for example, I'm quite academic. So when I'm in an academic environment, I work so hard But that's because if I'm not top of the class, then I'm bottom of the pile, because not only am I, because there's something else that's inaccessible. And I think just actually what I would love is just to be able to turn up to something and just be average, be middle ground, not extra good at something, not unable to access something, just in the middle. And I think that is something that disabled people just don't get. We don't get the middle ground. And I completely agree with you. I think normalizing it is so important, but also normalizing it in a way that is actually normal, because you get people. So followed Chris McCausland recently, and don't get me wrong, I love him. I think he's ace. I think he's hilarious. But I think that those sort of blind people who are in the spotlight, I think that doesn't necessarily give an accurate impression of disability. And I think it's just normalizing, as you said, not just the celebrities, but actually it's normalizing us, normalizing the people who are just doing their lives normally. But then I also think it's education and normalizing access. So like we were saying earlier about if there was braille on every doorknob, doing things like that, making things accessible, because then access leads to education, because someone sees braille and goes, oh, what's that? And then education leads to understanding and experiences of disability. So I suppose for me, it's normalizing access, education, and then experience of disability, I think is sort of the three-step process.
Okay, so can I ask you a question on the back of what you just said then? Talking about education and stuff, do you think that, because obviously a lot of people have gone to, we can talk about this, gone to, college for the blind, whatever, but do you think that having those special places where blind people can learn or do you think it should be like blind people should be integrated into mainstream more?
Right, I'm going to have to get my political, unemotional head out. Right, so I think that in an ideal world, the integration of blind people into mainstream is the optimum experience, because for the blind people and for those around them, in an ideal world, because that leads to normalizing understanding, normalizing access, blind person in mainstream, their peers are then seeing that. Education, they've got a blind person there. Also, if I'm not going to go into this, but I think that there should be more about disabilities in the curriculum.
Definitely.
And then experience, you've got a blind person with you. All of those things for the blind person, it means that they learn how to adapt to a mainstream environment. And if given the right support, I think that is the optimum. However, obviously, we don't live in an ideal world. People are underfunded. And so I think that if your mainstream experience is failing, then I do think that for some people, VI education is the best option. But I think that those VI educational places should be putting more effort into integrating their pupils into the wider community, because a lot of the places that in my experience, have been very much a bubble. And I don't think that is normal. That's not normal life, is it? So again, they should be encouraging exchange programs and trips out, and also independence, teaching blind people the skills to leave and then encouraging them to do so independently, in an attempt to, again, normalize access, educate, and lead to experience. So yeah.
It's like when when they do exchange trips at blind colleges or whatever, and they're like, oh, we're going to take you to see blind people in this college in France, and it's like, well, no, that's not the reality. They should let you do exchange with sighted people as well.
Yeah, absolutely, as well. It's great to go and see other blind people. Like, just have all the experiences, And for me, I was in mainstream, and then both my TAs resigned in the same week. So I ended up in VI education, and for me, that was a really good combination, because I got the experience of both, and I think they both led to very, very different and very, very good experiences when put together. But I think that also within VI education, within staff that work with VI people, I think that there is also a lot of ableism, because there's especially with the health and safety and things and safeguarding, I think there's so much fear that generally, again, in my experience, the pushing for independence and the integration into society is overshadowed by the fear of injury, the fear of getting it wrong and being blamed. And obviously there's other factors as well, but I think that actually ableism isn't restricted to people who've never experienced blindness. I think that's why, again, it's such an interesting topic, because it seeps into every area of life. Yeah. Grace, sorry, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. Were you in VI education at all, or were you mainstream?
No, my whole entire education from nursery to university was mainstream. And my view personally is that it's up to the individual, that going into the vision impaired world bubble of education, or life as it were, will either make you or break you, in the sense that the VI world is, those sort of colleges, those settings are tailored for their students, which is, or whoever's using them, which is brilliant for people who have that level of situation and need, and that's what's good for them. The risk of that is when, what if that person then comes home at weekends and they're in the mainstream world, and all of a sudden there's people using sighted language, and there are stairways, and there are things all over the floor, and things that they can walk into because it's a sighted world. It's getting that balance between, yes, we do need support, but we also need to, I'm someone who, I know that I need support. I completely get that. I understand it. But if everything was adapted and laid out for me and made fully safe all the time, I would lose all the skills that I've actually built from my experiences of the sighted world. So it's getting that balance.
I was the same as you, Lyd, because I went to mainstream, obviously spent 4 years in blind college and going to uni, which has obviously been mainstream. And I think it's like having that kind of balance of, seeing both sides, really. So I'm happy I've done what I've done, I've had that kind of balance. But I do agree with you, Grace, about like when I would go home for like the holidays when I was blind college, and it's trying to adapt back to that sighted world, and it's like saying, well, the sighted world is the real world kind of thing. So
yes.
I did find it, and then you'd go back to college, and then you'd be like, okay, now I'm around blind people again. So what do I need to change in maybe my language or this?
I think it's really interesting because I know a few people who have been in VI education since sort of year 7 and then have left in year 13 or year 13 plus, and have just suddenly had to go to university. And because they don't have the knowledge of how to function with sighted people. They haven't had to, and I think a lot of it is they haven't had to accept their differences, and they haven't had to accept, and again, going back to ableism, they haven't had to accept the level of ignorance and assumption that they receive from people, or they haven't had to accept, the conversation that isn't around voiceover and braille, and, suddenly they're being faced with sighted people who are talking about TikTok and visual things that they can't access all the time. And it's learning to deal with that in a way that is social. It's having the confidence to break in and be like, oh, what are you talking about? I can't access this. Let's replace it with something. But that is a skill that you have to learn as you get older and become more able to cope with both social situations and also your own disability and your own self, within who you are. And so I think that when you're in a bubble, you don't develop those skills. And so when you leave, it's like, oh my gosh, not only how is this world functioning, I don't know, but also who am I? Who am I in this space? Because suddenly I'm not with blind people, I'm with sighted people. How on earth do you even begin to make that adaptation if your VI educational establishment doesn't help you to develop all of those skills and integrate into the sighted world?
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's like when I love chatting with blind people, I love getting on with them, but I think it's also really important to be getting on with sighted people. And I always have like being enjoyed, like being part of that kind of sighted chat, when they will be saying, oh, we're looking at this and we're looking at this. That's okay, because that is the reality. And sometimes you just gotta enjoy that and be part of that, because that is the reality of the world, that people are going to be talking about that.
And it's also, coming back to that, it's when people skirt around and adapt their language, and it's, did you listen to the TV? And it's done in both communities, but things like, oh, I listened to that book. I'm like, no, you listen to the radio while you're reading a book.
I've always been a bit like, because I'm an audiobook person, I've just never really been into reading. But I didn't always like saying that. I just said, oh, I read the book, because it just sounds more normal.
I think even if I'm a Braille reader, but I think even if I did audiobooks, I would still say read.
Yeah, exactly.
When I use Braille, I don't say, oh, I Brailled my poetry, even though it comes out in Braille. I write poetry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is using that word, and it's like how you would, if you say to someone, oh, see you later, whatever, that's just natural. Yes, you're probably not going to visually see them, but you're still going to be with them, and therefore you're seeing them.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, what I also find is, like, if a blind or VI person likes that adaptive language, because some do, I have to really check myself and really be aware of that, because my default is to say, oh, did you see that TikTok video?
And then sometimes when you're with friends and stuff, and they'll look at you, because they're looking at you, and be like, how did you see it? I'd be like, that's just a phrase.
I think it's really interesting though, because with language, I think that often when people do hear the word ableism, they assume that that's what it's about. It's about using the right language. And actually, it's really not. I think language, for me, and I think for a lot of blind people, not for everyone, but for a lot of blind people, language is normally the last thing on our minds. Like, if you accept me as a person, you accept who I am, and you treat me normally, and you don't assume that I'm less than. If you then tell me that you use the wrong terminology, not that there is really wrong terminology, but, if you say something that is technically wrong, I don't know, like visually impaired versus vision impaired, some people don't like that. But I wouldn't bat an eyelid, because actually what you've done is you've treated me like a normal person. So you're not being ableist. And I think that that's the thing, isn't it? Like, language is for a lot of people, I mean, yes, if someone doesn't like a word, respect that, change your language. But the majority of the time, if you aren't ableist in the sense that we've talked about, if you are doing everything in your power to build accessibility into what you're doing, to normalize it, then whatever words you use, that's not the thing to be worrying about.
I mean, for me, like, I've been in a situation when people have been like, oh, yeah, so we really want you to do this work experience or whatever. And they'll be like, we want to talk to your teacher about how the best way is to do, because they're too scared to talk to you. And I just said to my teacher, like, okay, well, I'm joining the meeting. They can ask the questions to me, because I'm just going to show that I genuinely, for me, I would prefer you ask the questions and you offend me, because you're having that audacity to ask the questions, rather than just saying, oh, I don't want to ask you the questions. If someone asks me a question, I'm offended. I'd rather you asked than just saying, oh, I don't want to ask you because I'm too scared.
Definitely. I think if we're going to finish on a note, I think that actually ask people a question. If you don't understand something that's going on, or if you want to offer help, if you think, so going back to my earlier example of getting off a train, if you think that I am in danger, or that you want to offer me help, absolutely, please do come and ask me, because you both will probably agree, when we're out in public, we do rely on the public for help in some situations. And but ask, say, so I had a lady once, I was getting off a train, and she said, you probably know this, but there's a big step. Are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. And then she talked to me about something else as we were getting off, and she didn't help me. I mean, that is perfect. And then we got off onto the platform, and I said, oh, excuse me, would you mind taking me to where the stairs are, because my assistants hadn't turned up.
Oh, so you're just public?
Yeah, she was just public. And it was absolutely perfect. So I think that ask someone what they need, and then respect what they're saying. And if you do that, then you avoid ableism, and that will always be appreciated.
Yeah, like, don't just grab them and do things for them. Ask them what they want, We are us. We can talk about our needs. Yes, we want the help. We appreciate you asking. So just don't do anything for us. Ask what we want, and then we can tell you what support we need, because we probably do need some help.
I think I'm very lucky in that sense, in that I always go out with someone and it's always someone I trust. So I have quite close intuitive relationships with those people. So I don't have to ask them. They know when to help. They know when not to help, where my sort of boundaries are. I think there's that side of it as well. But for people who don't have that, absolutely. And I think it actually makes me think, I think there was a campaign done a few years ago, something about ask before you grab, or something about assuming that someone needs assistance. I think that was done by someone who was vision impaired.
I hope so. Ask before you grab is a great thing. Yeah, love that.
Yeah, I love that too.
We'll finish off there. Thank you for listening. I hope that you got something from that. If you're blind or not, I hope that you got something of value.
Thank you to Lydia, Grace and Amy there for a real good chat about ableism. I did learn a lot there. I'm sure you did too. I loved how you can hear ever so slightly, if you really listen carefully, you can hear Lydia's dog snoring in the background. When I was editing this, I was thinking, what is that noise? But no, thank you very much. It is the See It Our Way podcast, brought to you by VICTA. And now we hear from Ruqaiya as we continue learning about the process of getting a guide dog.
Let's talk about what happens after you get qualified with your guide dog. Hi, it's me again, Ruqaiya, and my guide dog, Bertie. So after you've completed your training with your guide dog, it's fairly smooth sailing, I'd say, which is quite relieving. The actual training process, I'd say, is the hard part. Now it's just time to focus on bonding with your dog, focusing on your routes, and just getting used to the new lifestyle. What's really nice is guide dogs have check-in sessions. They're called aftercare sessions. So after you've completed your training with your guide dog, you're a fully qualified pair. So you'll have your first aftercare visit after a week, then 3 weeks, then 6 weeks, and it will continue until about 6 months. Then once you, your guide dog and the guide dog mobility specialist are happy, it will continue once every year. Guide Dogs is with you whenever you need any help or support, which is brilliant. You have the contact details of your guide dog mobility specialist. You also get given the guideline number and also emergency contact, just in case anything goes wrong. You need to be well prepared. I'd say after you qualify for a guide dog, the two main things I'll say is make sure you have loads of fun with your new companion, but also stay super organised. You're in charge for this new little creature in your life, and you really need to look after them, whether that's medical related stuff, taking them to play, making sure they work. There are a lot of responsibility, but as I said, you're really going to enjoy having a little friend around. Here's a top tip for people. For those of you who don't know, a yellow and white harness is for a working guide dog. A yellow and brown harness is for a training guide dog. It's really important to know the difference. The amount of times I've been out working my guide dog Bertie, but loads of people still think I'm training him because I don't stereotypically look blind. And as we know, blindness doesn't look a certain way. So I think the different coloured harnesses is definitely important to know for people. As today's episode is related to ableism, I thought I'd talk to you about some of my main experiences I have with my guide dog. Now, this isn't to scare you at all, it's just to make you aware. I think the more aware you are of certain situations that can pop up, the more prepared you can be, which is really helpful. One of the main things I encounter with my guide dog is unfortunately refusals. I often get refused from taxis, restaurants, shops, but I think for these particular situations you need to know the law and you need to know your rights. It's absolutely illegal to refuse a guide dog from any public spaces, as they're a working mobility aid there to support a disabled person. If you're getting in a taxi and the taxi driver is trying to refuse your guide dog, just know that that is not allowed under the Equality Act. The only exemption to this rule is if the driver has a medical certificate saying that they are very severely allergic to dogs. So just know your rights. The Equality Act is there to support you as well. I would recommend, where possible, if you are facing an access refusal or have faced an access refusal, to report it. This is so more awareness can be brought to this topic and so more can be done to stop it as well.
This podcast is brought to you by VICTA, a charity supporting blind and partially sighted children and young adults.
It's Ellie again. Welcome back to another Ellie's Pet Peeves. And today I want to talk a little bit about misconception in the blind and visually impaired world with, well, a lot of sighted people thinking that we are very, very incapable of a lot of things. Like, one big thing that I've noticed is a lot think that we can't look after ourselves. I get a lot of questions about how I do my own makeup and hair because to some people it's just completely unbelievable that I can do that on my own independently. And I understand that some things are quite visual, so there is the question of how. But we always find ways to adapt and to, do things that work for us and find our own methods. But another thing is that a lot of people believe we also can't navigate the world and, find ways to do things independently. Everyone always believes that we at least need one sighted person with us at all times, which is just not the case. We are capable and we can do our own thing. We don't need help all the time. We have a lot of things that can help us, like apps and websites, and, audio description is a thing. It's been a thing for a long, long time. Like when people say like, oh, how do you read this? How do you read that? That is usually the answer, or large text, because not all of us are completely blind. And that is another big, big misconception, that there is only one condition. So if you are sighted and you think we all need to be treated the same, we don't. Ask us what we need. Ask us what can help us, and we will tell you, because we'd rather you ask than just assume. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking, and yeah, I don't like it when people think that they know what's better for me, when I am the only person who knows. Just because your eyes work, it doesn't mean you're any smarter.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Really learned a lot, and we are back in 2 months' time where we're going to be exploring education and employment, how we have navigated the education system and our experiences in employment being blind or visually impaired. It's going to be a real fascinating episode, so you won't want to miss that. Don't forget also, another episode of the Parent Podcast is out at the end of July.